Anthony Trent, Master Criminal, by Wyndham Martyn. Chapter 1. The First Step. Austin the butler gave his evidence in a straightforward fashion. He was a man slightly below middle height, inclined to portliness, but bore himself with the dignity of one who had been likened to an archbishop. Although he had been examined by a number of minor officials, hectored by them, threatened or cajoled as they interpreted their duty, his testimony remained the same. And when he hoped this tedious business was all over, he was brought before Inspector McWalsh and compelled to begin all over again. It was McWalsh's theory that a man may be startled into telling the truth that will convict him. He had a habit of leaning forward, chin thrust out, great fists clenched, and hurling accusations at suspects. He disliked Austin at sight. The feeling was not wholly of national origin. McWalsh liked witnesses, no less than criminals, to exhibit some indications of the terrors his name had inspired to the guilty. Austin gazed about him as though the surroundings were not to his taste. His attitude was one of deferential boredom. He recognized the inspector as one representing justly constituted authority to be accepted with respect in everything but a social sense. Inspector McWalsh permitted himself to make jocose remarks as to Austin's personal appearance. McWalsh passed for a wit among his inferiors. "At 12:30 on Tuesday I came into the library," the butler repeated patiently, "and asked Mr. Warren if he wanted anything before I went to bed." "What did he say?" demanded the inspector. "That he did not want anything and that I could go to bed." "And you did?" "Naturally," the butler returned. "What duties have you the last thing before retiring?" "I see that the doors and windows are fastened." The inspector sneered. The small black eyes set in his heavy red face regarded the smaller man malevolently. "And you did it so damn well that within an hour or so $10,000 worth of valuables was walked off with by a crook. How do you account for that?" "I don't try to," the butler answered suavely. "That's for you gentlemen of the police. I have my duties and I attend to them as my testimonials show. I don't presume to give you advice, but I should say it was because the crook was cleverer than your men." "Don't get funny," snapped McWalsh. He had on the table before him Austin's modest life history, which consisted mainly in terms of service to wealthy families in England and the United States. These proved him to be efficient and trustworthy. "I want answers to my questions and not comments from you." Austin's manner nettled him. It was that slightly superior air, the servant's mark of contempt. And never before had the inspector been referred to as a gentleman of the police. He suspected a slight. "Let's get this thing straight," he went on. "You went to bed when your services were no longer required. Your employer said to you, 'You can go to bed, Austin, I don't want anything.' So you looked up and retired. You didn't know anything about the burglary until 6:30 on Wednesday morning, this morning. You roused your employer who sent for the police. That's correct?" "Absolutely," Austin returned. He was, plainly, not much interested. "And you still stick to it that Mr. Warren made that remark?" Austin looked at the inspector quickly. His bored manner was gone. "Yes," he said deliberately. "To the best of my knowledge, those were his words. I may have made a mistake in the phrasing, but that is what he meant." "What's the good of your coming here and lying to me?" The inspector spoke in an aggrieved tone. "I was brought here against my will," Austin reminded him, "and I have not lied, although your manner has been most offensive. You see, sir, I'm accustomed to gentlefolk." McWalsh motioned him to be silent. "That'll do," he commanded. "I'm not interested in what you think. Now answer this carefully. What clothes was Mr. Warren wearing?" "Evening dress," said the butler, "but a claret-coloured velvet smoking jacket instead of a black coat." "How was he looking?" "Do you mean in what direction?" "You know I don't. I mean, was he looking as usual? Was there anything unusual in his look?" "Nothing that I noticed," Austin told him. "But then his back was to me, so I am not competent to judge." "When you speak to anyone, don't you go up and look him in the face like a man, same as I'm talking and looking at you?" Austin permitted himself to smile. "Do you suggest I should look at Mr. Warren as you are looking at me? Pardon me, sir, but I should lose my place if I did." McWalsh flushed a darker red. "Why didn't you look at him in your own way, then?" "It's very clear," Austin answered with dignity, "that you know very little of the ways of an establishment like ours. I stood at the door as I usually do, asked a question I've done hundreds of times, and received the same answer I do as a rule. If I'd known I was to have to answer all these questions, I might have recollected more about it." "What was Mr. Warren doing?" "Reading a paper and smoking." "He was alone?" "Yes." "And all the other servants had gone to bed?" "Yes." "You heard no unusual sounds that night?" "If I had, I should have investigated them." "No doubt," sneered the other. "You look like a man who would enjoy running into a crook with a gun." "I should not enjoy it," Austin returned seriously. Inspector McWalsh beckoned to one of his inferiors. "Keep this man outside till I send for him, and see he don't speak to his boss who's waiting. Set Mr. Warren right in." Conington Warren, one of the most popular men in society, member of the desirable clubs, millionaire owner of thoroughbreds, came briskly in. He was now about 50, handsome still, but his florid face was marked by the convivial years. Inspector McWalsh had long followed the Warren colours famous on the big race-courses. His manner showed his respect for the owner of his favourite stable. "I asked you to come here," he began, "because you told my secretary over the phone that you had some new light on this burglary. So far it seems just an ordinary case without any unusual angles." "It's not as ordinary as you think," said Conington Warren. He offered McWalsh one of his famous cigars. "Incidentally, it does not show me up very favourably, as I am bound to admit." McWalsh regarded his cigar reverently. Warren smoked nothing but these superb things. What a man! What a man! "I can't believe that, Mr. Warren," he returned. "Are you interested in the thoroughbreds, McWalsh?" "Am I?" cried the other enthusiastically. "Why, when I couldn't spend a few hours at old Sheepshead Bay, I nearly resigned. Why, Mr. Warren, I made enough on Conington when he won the Brooklyn Handicap to pay the mortgage off on my home." "Then you'll understand," the sportsman said graciously. "It's like this. Last year I bought a number of yearlings at the Newmarket sales in England. There's one of them, a chestnut colt named Saint-Beau, who did a most remarkable trial a day or two since. In confidence, Inspector, it was better than Conington's best. Make a note of that, but keep it under your head." "I surely will, sir," cried the ecstatic McWalsh. "When I heard the time of the trial, I gave a little dinner to a number of good pals at Voisin's." The names he mentioned were all of them prominently known in the fashionable world of sport. "We had more champagne than was good for us, and when the dinner was over we all went to Reggie Camplin's rooms, where he invented the Saint-Beau cocktail. I give you my word, Inspector, the thing has a thoroughbred kick to it. It's one of those damp insidious cocktails wrapped up in cream to make you think it's innocent. After I'd had a few, I said to Camplin, "You've made me what I am tonight. I insist on sleeping here." "But you didn't," cried McWalsh. "Until 4 in the morning. The same boat cocktail made me so ill at 4 that I got up and walked down to my house." "What time did you get there?" "Exactly at 5. I felt the need of the cool air, so I took a long walk first." "Then at 12:30 you were at—" "Voisin's, as a score of people can prove. I had a table in the balcony, and saw all the people I ever knew, it seemed to me." "But this morning you told the officers who made an investigation of the robbery a totally different story. You corroborated your butler's evidence that you were at home at 12:30, and told him to go to bed because you didn't want anything else. How do you account for that?" The inspector was troubled. His only consolation was that he would have another session soon with the supercilious Austin. He licked his lips at the thought. But he did not wish to involve the horseman in any difficulties if he could avoid it. Conington Warren laughed easily. "You know how it is, Inspector. You can understand that sometimes a man suddenly waked out of heavy sleep can forget what happened the night before for the time being. That's what happened with me. I clean forgot the dinner, Camplin's same boat cocktail, everything. I only knew I had the devil of a head. I always rely on Austin." "When did you remember?" McWalsh demanded. "When Camplin came in to see me and asked for the ingredients of the cocktail, which he claims I invented. Then I recollected everything and telephoned to you." "I knew that damn fellow was lying," McWalsh cried. "He thought he was clever. He'll find out just how smart he is. Tell me, Mr. Warren, what did he want to put up that fiction for?" Warren put a hot hand to a head which still ached. "I can't imagine," he answered. "I've never found him out in a lie yet. He's too damn conceited to descend to one. I don't think you should suspect Austin." "I'm sorry, Mr. Warren, but I've got to. He lied to you and he lied to me, and $10,000 worth of stuff was stolen. He's in the outer room now. I'll have him brought in." Austin entered with his precise and measured tread, and bowed with respectful affection to his employer. He liked Conington Warren better than any American with whom he had taken service. The hearty, horse-loving type was one which appealed to Austin. He had several times been obliged to throw up lucrative jobs because employers persisted in treating him as an equal. "This is a bad mix-up," his master began. "The inspector seems to think you've been deceiving him." "He has, and he knows it," cried McWalsh. "He's inclined to be hasty, sir," said Austin tolerantly. "See here," snapped the inspector. "You say you found Mr. Warren in his library at 12:30. Did you hear him enter the house?" "No," the butler returned. "He has his key." "The thing we want to clear up," interrupted Mr. Warren in a kindly tone, "is simply this. What did I say to you when you spoke to me?" Austin looked uncomfortable. "It was a gesture, sir, rather than a word. You waved your arm, and I knew what you meant." "You are one prize liar," roared the inspector. "You said something quite different when I asked you." "I don't see that it matters much," Austin returned acidly. "On Monday night Mr. Warren may have said for me to go to bed. On Tuesday he may have waved his hand impatient-like. On Wednesday he may have asked for cigars or the evening papers. I remember only that on this occasion I was not asked for anything." He turned to his employer. "I should like to remind you, sir, that we are giving a dinner party tonight, and I ought to be seeing after it now. Can I go, sir?" "You cannot," cried Inspector McWalsh. "You're under arrest." "I told you he was hasty, sir," said Austin, without emotion. "What for, may I ask?" "Let me answer him, please, Inspector," begged Conington Warren. "You told the police you saw me sitting in my library. Are you prepared to swear to that, Austin?" "Certainly, sir," said the man. "You were in the big Turkish rocker, smoking one of the cigars you are smoking now, and reading the Sporting Times." "I'd give $1,000 to know who that was," Warren commented. "It wasn't I at all. I was dining at Voisin's at that hour." For the first time Austin was acutely disturbed. "I don't understand," he stammered. "It looked like you, sir. It did indeed." "And if you'd only gone up like a man and looked in his face you'd have seen the burglar," McWalsh said, scowling. Austin looked at the speaker coldly. "It is not my business to suspect my employer of being a crook. If it's crime to be deceived, then I'm guilty. I admit I didn't look very closely. I was sleepy and wanting to go to bed, but I did notice that whoever it was wore a claret-coloured velvet smoking jacket." "I've a list here," said McWalsh, "given my man by the footman of the people who called at Mr. Warren's house yesterday. Look it over and see if you can supplement it." "There was one other visitor," Austin said slowly. "An intimate friend of Mr. Warren's, but I don't know his name. I didn't admit him." "That's curious," said his employer. "I thought you knew everyone who was intimate enough to come to my home. What was he like?" "I didn't see him full face," the other admitted. "But he was tall, about your height, but dark in colouring, with a rather large nose. It struck me he was a trifle in liquor, if I may say so." "I don't remember anyone like that," Warren asserted. "The gentleman," said Austin, anxious to establish his point, "who bet you $10,000 that his filly could beat your Saint Beau at 5 furlongs." "This is all damned nonsense," returned Conington Warren a little crossly. "I'm in possession of my full senses now, at all events. I made no such wager." "I told you he was a crook, Mr. Warren," cried McWalsh gleefully. "See what he's trying to put over on you now." "Surely, sir," said the butler anxiously, "you remember asking a gentleman to come into your dressing-room." "You're crazy," his master declared. "I asked nobody. Why should I?" "He was standing just inside the room as I passed by. He was very merry. He was calling you Connie, like only your very intimate friends do." "And what was I saying?" Warren returned, impressed with the earnestness of one in whom he believed. "I didn't listen, sir," the butler answered. "I was just passing along the hall." "Did you hear Mr. Warren's voice?" McWalsh demanded suddenly. Austin reflected. "I wouldn't swear to it," he decided. "What time was it?" Warren asked. "A little after 10, said Austin. "I left the house at 8, so you're not likely to have heard me. I was at Voisin's from 8:30 until nearly 1. When did you first see this supposed friend?" "I was going up the main stairway as he was about to come down toward me. Almost directly I saw him, I didn't at the time think he saw me. He turned back as if you'd called him from your room. He said, 'What is it, Connie?' Then he walked down the corridor and stood halfway in your room, talking to you, as I supposed. He looked like a gentleman who might belong to your club, sir, and spoke like one. What was I to think?" "I'm not blaming you," said Conington Warren. "I'm as puzzled as you are. Didn't Yokohama see him when he went to my room to get my smoking jacket, which you say he wore? What was Yokohama doing to allow that sort of thing?" "You forget, sir," explained Austin, "that Yokohama wasn't there." "Why wasn't he?" "Directly he got your note he went off to the camp." "This gets worse and worse," Warren asserted. "I sent him no note." He got one in your writing, apparently written on the stationery of the Knickerbocker Club. I saw it. You told him to go instantly to your camp and prepare it for immediate occupancy. He was to take Evans and one of the touring cars. He got the note about 8:30. Just after you'd left the house, McWalsh commented. It didn't take Yokohama a half-hour to prepare, added Austin. What do you make of it, Inspector? Warren demanded. A clever crook, that's all, said the other. But he can't pull anything like that in this town and get away with it. Austin made a polite gesture implying doubt. It incensed the official. You don't think so, eh? Not from what I've seen of your methods. I've no doubt you can deal with the common ruck of criminals, but this man is different. It may be easy enough for a man to deceive you people by pretending to be a gentleman, but we can see through them. Frankly, said Austin, growing bolder, I don't think you gentlemen of the police have the native wit for the higher kind of work. Warren looked from one to the other of them. This was a new and rebellious Austin, a man chafing under a personal grievance, a belligerent butler. You mustn't speak like that to Inspector McWalsh, he commanded. He's doing his duty. That may be, sir, Austin remarked. But how would you like to be called Little Lancelot from London? You look it, McWalsh said roughly. Anyway, I've no time to argue with house servants. What you've got to do is to look through our collection of pictures and see if you can identify any of them with the man you say you saw. Austin surveyed the faces with open aversion. He's not here, said Austin decisively. He was not this criminal type at all. I tell you, I mistook him for a member of Mr. Warren's clubs, the kind of gentleman who dines at the house. These, and he pointed derisively to the pillories of crime, you wouldn't be likely to see any of these at our house. They're just common. McWalsh sneered. I see. Look more like policemen, I suppose. Austin smiled blandly. The very thing that was in my mind. End of chapter 1.